Next tonight, news at 10 with Alistair Burnett and Sandy Gall at ITN.
Take home a Gino Ginelli ice cream on Piazza Italia. Italian chic, Italian style, Italian verb, Italian cool, toffee fudge, chocolate, mint choc chip, tutti frutti, what a cutie. Take a Gino home with you.
Gino Ginelli, the ice cream sensation.
Gino, oh Gino Ginelli.
Hello. Did you know that all Mitsubishi cars come with a free 3-year unlimited mileage warranty? Cars like the Shogun, Mitsubishi's famous off-road vehicle, or indeed the Colt hatchback, which is available with both power steering and automatic transmission. Then there's the Space Wagon, with 3 rows of seats, room enough for 7 in comfort. And finally, the Mitsubishi Galant, with unique 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steer.
Sorry, we are late.
The winner of the 1989 RAC Rally. Mitsubishi Motors, designed to be driven.
Oh, hello, Jan, it's me.
We're all a bit more health conscious these days, aren't we? I eat these low-fat meals from Birdseye called Healthy Options. Tandoori chicken masala, marinated pieces of chicken in a spicy curry sauce, and man-sized portions. Hello, Jeffrey. I was just talking about you.
Now you don't have to be health mad to take the healthy option.
Here he goes.
Madam, with you, sir. Any more now, please? And 50. Madam, so.
Do these babies want their British gas heating turned up or down? He's happy. If he was cold, his fur would stand up to trap warm air. He'd shiver, increasing his body heat by 5 times. He'd hug himself to keep warm. She's not saying much. If her fur is standing up, it's hard to see. She won't have the ability to shiver for months or hug herself. The only way to tell is to touch her. She's fine. Hardly surprising. British gas central heating is one of the most controllable systems known to man or beast.
You're watching Tyne Tees. The time now, 10 o'clock.
Mr. Gummer ends Europe's ban on beef at a price. President Gorbachev tells his allies they must start again. Mrs. Thatcher goes to tell him we'll negotiate. Swindon are ordered from the 1st Division to the 3rd. And President de Klerk lifts the emergency, just wins a by-election. Good evening. France, Germany and Italy lifted their ban on British beef tonight. It follows new safeguards against the cattle disease BSE agreed by Common Market Agriculture ministers in Brussels today. Britain's Agriculture Minister, Mr. John Gummer, who'd opposed any restrictions, said the deal was good for Britain. He's due to make a statement to the Commons later tonight. Labour called the Brussels agreement a humiliating climb down by Mr. Gummer.
24 hours after it began, this marathon session of the Council of Agriculture Ministers finally reached agreement. Britain's John Gummer won the battle to have the ban on British beef exports lifted, but at a price. Britain has had to make 2 major concessions to the French, Germans and Italians. First, live cattle exports will be limited to calves under 6 months old from certified BSE-free cows. and certificates guaranteeing beef exports will be from BSE-free herds. Generally, only 1 or 2 cows in a herd are affected by the disease, which scientists say is spread genetically and not laterally through a herd. The new ruling will affect 7,500 herds in Britain, around 5% of the total. John Gummer is delighted with the outcome of the meeting, which he believes offers the best possible news for Britain's beef farmers.
The bans have gone, that they are in a better position to sell into Germany than they've been for months, that we've actually got back to legality, that there's investigation of the incidents of BSE in other countries, that they'll be very pleased about, that there's proper research, and that at long last we're getting ruminant bans on the sort of feeding which we've not done for 2 years. It's started in Holland, it's in Denmark now. We hope that the French will follow suit, and the Commission is going to oversee it. I think they've got a lot to cheer about.
The British beef industry had faced total ruin. Farmers' leaders are greeting today's decision with relief.
The one thing farmers will be really glad about now is that we've got a chance of getting our markets back to normal. We've got the Scientific and Veterinary Committee given a complete clearance to beef, and I hope we can start rebuilding confidence on the market now.
The French minister, Gino Ginelli, says he's now satisfied that public health is no longer at risk, but France, Germany and Italy were under threat of legal action.
Were it not for the fact that we had this agreement this evening, then already the legal procedures were in place and ready to move and on a fast track.
Both sides can claim to have retired from this confrontation with their honour intact. Despite the concessions they've made, the British have achieved their primary objective, the immediate lifting of the ban on the export of British beef. Glenn O'Glaser, News at 10, Brussels.
Banbury Stockyard is one of the biggest prime beef auctions in Britain. On a normal Thursday, they sell almost £1.5 million worth of fat cattle. Today, that turnover was halved because of worries about BSE. Prices were down £100 an animal. But farmers here hope today's news from Brussels will mean the beginning of the end of hard times that threaten to ruin some of them.
Hopefully now things will get back on the level footing and people will understand the situation and things can get back to normal.
Some farmers would like even tougher regulations to reassure the public that beef is safe.
What's frustrating is that most farmers want to put their own house in order. A survey that was published today by Farming News showed that 80% of a survey of 100 British dairy and beef farmers wanted the total elimination of animal waste products being fed to live animals.
Tonight, as farmers at Banbury came to a special meeting on BSE, they were relieved at the lifting of the ban, despite new regulations.
Anything we can do to stop this problem spreading has got to be good. I mean, we want the public confidence. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
We've got to get it moving again. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but we've got to build the confidence up now, haven't we?
Farmers here see any new safety regulations from Brussels as an acceptable price they must pay to rebuild public confidence in their industry.
The residual risk has been removed. That's the message that you've all got to preach from here till kingdom come, not only as farmers but as consumers.
The talk here in Banbury today has been of rebuilding public confidence in the safety of beef, and the statements coming from Brussels will help farmers in that task. But with so many scientific uncertainties about BSE, the task they face is a steep one. Lawrence McGinty, News at 10 in Banbury.
Mrs. Thatcher arrived in Moscow tonight for talks with Mr. Gorbachev. Hours earlier, the Soviet leader told his Warsaw Pact partners that the organization needed to change radically if it was to survive. It was the first Warsaw Pact meeting to be held since the political revolution in Eastern Europe last year. The faces round the table at today's summit have changed dramatically in the past 12 months. President Gorbachev is one of the few to have survived from the previous summit. The host at that meeting, President Ceausescu of Romania, was executed and has been replaced by President Iliescu. The former East German leader, Erich Honecker, is replaced by the Prime Minister de Maizière. The Bulgarian leader, Todor Zhivkov, was ousted. His place is taken by President Petar Mladenov. Rezsa Nyerts of Hungary is another casualty, elected instead the Prime Minister Josef Antal. The former Czech hardliner, Miloš Jakeš, has gone. The Czech delegation is led by the former dissident President Václav Havel. And President Jaruzelski of Poland also remains, but without his old authority.
Mrs. Thatcher arrived in Moscow tonight, the first Western leader to be able to quiz President Gorbachev on today's changes in the Warsaw Pact. She knows the seven-nation alliance is facing a bleak future that have only increased a sense of insecurity here. Met by the Soviet Prime Minister, she sees her visit as an opportunity in part to reassure the Soviet leadership of Western intentions. This Warsaw Pact meeting was different from the start. No longer dictators talking in unison, no longer men looking to Moscow for their inspiration. With democratic leaders facing him, Gorbachev knew he had to abandon any hopes of using the pact to reinforce Soviet power. President Gorbachev agreed to the radical reforms needed. His aim? To transform the pact into a loose democratic grouping. President Havel of Czechoslovakia, who has spoken so powerfully against opposing alliances, talked tonight approvingly of the meeting. He said the Warsaw Pact had changed fundamentally. I think it's very comprehensive and thrilling. Surrounded by reporters, the Soviet Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze spoke in still more radical terms. He said he wanted the Warsaw Pact armies and NATO to work towards a pan-European organization that would embrace both. Such a diplomatic initiative would, the Soviets believe, solve the problems of a disintegrating Warsaw Pact and make irrelevant the question of the military alliance of a united Germany.
The situation in Europe changed radically, mainly because of the change in Eastern Europe. And Warsaw Pact and NATO, in my view, it's my opinion, are losing its raison d'etre.
Leaders did share, above all else, an anxiety about the direction of so powerful a German state. Tonight, the leaders said they shared a dream, that the terms East and West should refer only to Europe's geography and no longer to its politics. Robert Moore, News at 10, Moscow.
Earlier, Mrs. Thatcher told NATO ministers meeting at Turnberry and Ayrshire that Western defences still need to be strong despite the changes in Eastern Europe. Mrs. Thatcher said NATO would continue to flourish as an alliance for freedom, justice and democracy.
Mrs. Thatcher arrived at the Turnberry Hotel with the message that NATO must change yet keep up its firm defence. While police patrolled the windswept beaches in a tight security operation, NATO foreign ministers discussed ways to make a united Germany joining NATO more palatable to the Soviet Union. West German Foreign Minister Genscher backed an American 9-point plan and stressed 4 key points. There would need to be a new treaty setting limits on the number of German and other European troops. East and West German parliaments would shortly declare acceptance of the existing border with Poland. There should be a new security role for the 35-nation CSCE Human Rights Organization. And there could be some security treaty between NATO and what remains of the Warsaw Pact. So how soon could German and British troops be included in negotiations?
Well, that's not been worked out at all. All we're saying is that we would be willing at the right time to discuss, to have as part of a general disarmament discussion, how all forces in that central zone of Europe might be counted and therefore limited.
The Prime Minister talked of the need for NATO to think imaginatively about the future. The world is changing faster than our way of thinking, she said, but she stressed a continuing NATO need for nuclear weapons in Europe.
Without adequate nuclear weapons kept up to date and based forward in Europe, our defense would be very much less secure.
NATO's strategy has been under review here today, but whereas the Warsaw Pact has been talking itself out of military existence, the NATO nations say that their military alliance is still strong and they want to keep it that way. Geoffrey Archer, News at 10, Turnberry.
The border between 2 Soviet Central Asian republics has been closed as ethnic tensions there continue to rise. Thousands of people armed with makeshift weapons are massing along the border between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. 48 people have been killed in fighting in the region this week. Trouble began in the border town of Osh. A state of emergency has now been declared in Frunze, the Kyrgyz capital, where 4,000 people tried to storm the Communist Party headquarters, demanding the right to fight against the Uzbeks.
Here, Swindon Town Football Club have been demoted from the First Division to the Third for making irregular payments to players. The Football League announced the decision at Villa Park just 10 days after Swindon were promoted to the First Division for the only time in their history. The league haven't yet decided who'll replace Swindon in the First Division.
Swindon directors arrived at the hearing in Birmingham, pleading guilty to 36 charges against them. Their only hope, a plea for mercy on the grounds that the illegal payments were made at the time Lou Macari was manager. Since then, both Macari and then chairman Brian Hillier have gone. Former Swindon star Don Rogers brought a petition signed by more than 40,000 people in the town, pleading that their team shouldn't be relegated. But after an 8-hour hearing, the Commission announced the decision.
That Swindon Town Football Club be demoted by 2 divisions, i.e. to the 3rd Division as of season 1990-91.
The Swindon officials would make only the briefest of statements.
I would ask our supporters to remain calm and leave the Board of Directors a short time to consider the question of an appeal. Thank you.
What is your reaction to the league's decision?
Devastating. That's it, gentlemen.
The decision means Swindon's 1-0 win over Sunderland in the 2nd Division playoff 10 days ago is completely wasted and must place a major question mark over whether their Argentinian manager, Ozzy Ardiles, presently in his native country, will want to return. In Swindon tonight, the fans were equally shocked.
It's just bad for the whole town. It's going to cause a lot of trouble, definitely. The way we've been treated, and unfortunately it always rebounds on the supporters. It always rebounds on the people who come through the turnstiles and pay the money. It's just a very, very sad day.
It's the first time for nearly a quarter of a century that the league has imposed this most severe penalty, but it's a reflection of the seriousness with which they view these charges. The league now have to work out which club will replace Swindon in the 1st Division, one of the relegated clubs, possibly Sheffield Wednesday or Sunderland from the 2nd Division, and consequential changes in the next 2 divisions. Giles Smith, ITN Sport, Villa Park.
President de Klerk has lifted South Africa's 4-year-old state of emergency in most of the country. He told Parliament in Cape Town it was time to let bygones be bygones. But the emergency laws will stay in Natal, where there's been bitter faction fighting. Emergency laws allowed the government to hold people without trial, ban meetings, suspend newspapers, and restrict the right to travel. In Paris, Mr. Nelson Mandela welcomed the news, but said sanctions against South Africa should stay. Here, the Foreign Office called it a further positive step forward.
It was to a specially convened session of South Africa's segregated parliament that President de Klerk announced most of the country was returning to the rule of law.
I have decided to announce that there will no longer be a general countrywide state of emergency, but that henceforth it will exist in Natal only.
The state of emergency was imposed 4 years ago to quell a black uprising. Tens of thousands of people were detained without trial and political activity was suppressed. But since February, President de Klerk has moved rapidly